Nick. There's the recording, so that's good. So I'm Wessel Kelly, and I'm with the Puget Sound Partnership. And Nick Teeler and I are going to be hosting today. We're splitting it into first hour and second hour just because I cannot be here for the second hour. So Nick will take over at the halfway point. And a brief introduction. So we at Puget Sound Partnership are a rather well, I was going to say we're large. We're not that large. A lot of people that we community members who are all doing the work for us basically. And as a backbone agency, we are trying to keep track of what everyone is doing and try to come up with a cohesive plan to organize the efforts and the recovery work and throughout the community, so that we're not duplicating work and we're making progress in the right direction. So at the partnership, I do a lot of our data systems management, and right now we're really focusing on implementation and trying to track implementation. And I would say we haven't, we're taking baby steps in that direction. We don't have any answers yet, but we're having several things that we're trying. And yeah, and then I think I'll turn it over to Nick to say a few words about what he does and the partnership's role. Go for it, Nick.
Thanks, Wes. Yeah, I think that was a great explanation. Working for a backbone agency is interesting work, and a unique position to be in to help our state agency and local partners around Puget Sound Recovery. I work specifically in the planning team, so helping along with the planning documents that we have for Puget Sound Recovery, and hoping to reflect that monitoring and tracking work within the strategies known as implementation strategies that we have, which are our roadmap to how we get to our articulated goals. So really happy to be here and excited to help MC the meeting today. I'll turn it back over to Wes.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so we've put the links to the agenda in the chat, so please do refer to that. Excuse me, I'm getting over COVID actually, so I'm in my third week. I'm almost there. We have actually a relatively light load, I would say, for our moderation and facilitation duties. We're starting out, the first hour is going to be our initiative showcase. And we have several presenters who are going to be presenting for 5 to 10 minutes each, approximately. And we're going to try to go as quickly as we can to get them all in. And so I think we decided that we're going to try to save questions till the end. But please keep them in mind. If any questions come to mind during the talks, please keep them in mind. And we're hoping to have a little time at the end to review questions. And if not, then we can take those offline. So to start with, we have LIDAR conservation standards, and it's Ash and Caroline who are presenting.
Hi there, I'm Ash Baker, and I think we can, yeah, there we go. So I am going to go through this kind of quickly here, but we have been working on the LIDAR conservation standards for several years now. We can go on the next slide here with this quite broad team of folks. Carrie just joined us on the work last year to support us with Meraki as well, Meraki Resources. But it's been a CMP funded initiative, and it's been supported by CMP and CCNet. We've had a lot of testing from the community and piloting from the community. So a lot of really good input from everybody, really. And probably many of you on the call have also offered input and insights into how to make the tools better. So we are going to draw on your insights again during this quick showcase here. Let's move forward. Okay, so the relationship to the strategic plan, I think you can click twice here. Basically, this is just associated with, improving the guidance, making sure that they're high quality and accessible, and then that people are using the guidance that we develop for the conservation standards. So this suite of tools is really focused on getting more people to use the conservation standards and making the conservation standards seem more accessible. Next slide. There are three main components, and as I said, I'm going to go through this quickly. So there's an intro video at the bottom that you might want to just have open and check on later to go into more details about how to use the tools and where to find everything. But the suite of tools includes the Recipes for Conservation, a conservation standards toolkit, formerly known as the Lighter Approaches to the conservation standards. We have a name question for you coming up. That's where we're going to look for your insights in just a minute. So keep that in mind. But that tool is basically, it includes a series of recipe cards for lighter conservation standard scenarios. And that draws on the resource in the middle there. So meaning, maybe if you're coming in and you already have a strategy developed, but you need to develop a monitoring plan for it, what are the key parts of CS that you need to pull from? So we tried to help people meet them where they're at. And that's what we mean by lighter scenarios. So that's part of the toolkit, but then there's a huge chunk of the toolkit that includes tip sheets, how to facilitate and to really make each step in the conservation standards happen. And again, that's really drawing from our CCNet and CMP community, what you do. So that's the kind of the set of tools there. And then the examples and resources document, each tip sheet has examples or resources associated with it. That includes things like templates and guidance. And I'll go into that a little bit more. I think you can click once here and you'll see a star there because that's what we focused on for the past year. So I'm not going to talk much about the other two resources. You may know about them, but you can learn more about them by looking at that intro video. But what I am going to talk more about on the next slide is the name. So we, as I said, used to call it Lighter Approaches to the Conservation Standards, a cookbook. The name has shifted to Recipes for Conservation, a conservation standards toolkit, and that's largely because of community suggestion. Now that we've kind of completed most of the heaviest lift of the work and it's really ready and out there to be used, we want to check back in with you all and see if it makes sense to make that name change or if we're losing something by doing that. So we're going to poll you in a second, but pros and cons here. Lighter Approaches, it's a known name. People might be excited to use Lighter CS if they're worried about how onerous it is. It speaks to the CS scenarios portion of the toolkit, but it doesn't speak to the detail in the tip sheets and the resources. And people might misinterpret it as a different version of the standards. On the other side, the toolkit version, we would lose name recognition, but it is representative of the whole suite of tools, and it doesn't affect the perception as CS is time consuming the way that Lighter does. So that's kind of like we're losing that positive thing that we gained from calling it Lighter. So with that, we just want to take a quick poll here and just see what you think. We'll just quick gut reaction here. We'll just use this as insight. It's not going to make the final decision for us, but it probably will really put us in the right direction for our decision. So let us know what you think is best.
So people do need to click on the link in the chat. We will be using Poll Everywhere throughout the webinar today.
Okay. Could there be other names than those in the poll? We have gone through a lot of different names. There probably could be other names, but these two have been very thoughtfully created based on other CCNet and CMP discussions. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't like to hear your suggestion. I think we'd still love to hear it. So if you have suggestions, feel free to share that with us. You might just have the winner there. If we go to the next slide, do we lose the poll? Does it close? No.
Good question.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think it stays open.
Okay.
It should.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, let's move forward so that we can. Great. So we can skip this slide actually. Yep, there. Oh, it's showing skipped slides right now here. Keep going. There we go. Okay. And you can click through this here. Yeah. So this is where we spent most of our time working. I have sent or am sending right now in the chat box the direct link to this tool here. We have so much good information here now from a couple different CCNet discussions and some CMP input. So if you are looking for tools and resources and examples, you will find them in here. If you don't find them in here, but you have one, we'd love to include it. I am just really thrilled to be sharing this with you guys because I have to say that I don't know, I can't imagine a tool that you need that's not in here. I think that the team, the community has done such a great job of compiling everything here. And so when you go into that toolkit, you can find at the bottom right corner for each different tip sheet. So for each activity you might do, there's a set of examples or resources, whether it's a template or guidance, it's in there. And you can make a copy and just use it as is or adapt it to your scenario, whatever works best. So I encourage you to explore that. Let's go to the next slide here. And then you can just click through any animation. So April to May, we're going to host a webinar for the community to get a little bit more familiar with the tools. And we're also going to pass it along to the CS Guidance Committee for review so we can get it up on the website. But we definitely want more examples and resources from what you guys are working with. I think that it's only going to get better and better. We've called it a living document, so we want to make sure that you can continue to offer your input into it over time. And if you want to send those resources, reach out to Caroline here. And yeah, let us know what you think when you try it out.
Okay, so Caroline has shared the link to the slide deck in the chat. So you should be able to go into the slide deck and add in any questions you have. I can see you're already putting questions into the chat as well. It looks like based on time, we're not going to have a lot of time to address those questions now, but we can get back to you. So if you include your email address and your name in your question, we can always get back to you. If you need us to share resources, that sort of thing. But we'll hopefully have some time at the end. We'll see how we go. I'm actually just going to jump straight in because I'm doing the next presentation here. Thanks, Wes. So, and the following one after that as well. So I'm just going to keep going for the sake of time. So in this presentation, I'll be chatting about the work of the Conservation Standards Effectiveness and Impact Initiative. This initiative has been running for some time already, a couple of years. So in 2023, we really aimed to support CMP and the conservation standards community to use an evidence-based learning approach to understand the effectiveness of CMP's strategies. So a lot of this work links to this. This is the high-level theory of change, which includes all of CMP's strategies. And most of our work actually links towards the end of that theory of change, related to really understanding the assumptions associated with the use of the conservation standards practices and principles, and how that leads to the desired outcomes of improved effectiveness and impact. This heading up here is actually a hyperlink. So if you're in the slides, it gives you a hyperlink to our resources that we've developed over the last couple of years. In 2021, we compiled evidence within this report, which helped our community to understand more of the benefits and rewards and evidence that exists already around applying the conservation standards. In 2022, we really focused on developing tools to help teams more easily collect data associated with their team's conservation practice. How do we assess our conservation practice over time? And this helped identify a set of indicators to support teams with just that. So that's actually a link to a website. And then finally, in 2023, we used this evidence-based learning approach to explore the effectiveness and impact of applying the conservation standards. And this is what our report looks like. A big shout out to Mike and Stephanie, who supported with this work. I forgot to mention that I've been co-leading this work along with Sheila O'Connor, who is not here today. There's a link in the slide deck to this report if you want to have a look at it. Some of the major outcomes of this work was essentially the consolidation of evidence associated with 5 critical learning questions that we identified. These were our 5 learning questions, and I'll talk through what some of that evidence showed us. So for question 1, does investment into the use of the conservation standards lead to improved conservation practice? We found that there was support for the assumption that purposeful investment into the conservation standards does lead to better understanding of the situation, better implementation, and better project planning. But we found that if the CS principles are not well understood or implemented well, any investment in the conservation standards may actually result in diminishing returns on that investment. For learning question 2, does enhanced support skills and systems for the conservation standards lead to improved conservation practice? Here we found some and strong support associated with this assumption. So in the scientific literature, we found strong support for the correlation between supportive leadership and the ability to foster a culture of learning within an organization, both within and outside of the conservation sector. Looking at learning question number 3, does conservation practice improve with enhanced team inclusivity and diversity? There was strong support for this assumption and notable evidence that fostering the participation of diverse groups of stakeholders can improve effectiveness, but the policies, methods, and systems for sustained participation are really important considerations. Learning question 4 was all about theories of change. So does conservation practice improve with the use of a theory of change? We found significant support for this assumption, that the application of a theory of change does lead to enhanced articulation of core assumptions and expected success, resulting in improved understanding, monitoring, learning, and decision-making. But the assumption was refuted under the condition when theories of change were not well developed or certain enabling conditions were lacking. And finally, learning question number 5 was about applying a structured approach of adaptive management and whether or not that leads to the increased likelihood of project or conservation success. In this case, we found significant supporting evidence that teams who apply a structured approach to adaptive management are more likely to achieve the goals and objectives. But similar to previous assumptions, the evidence suggests that only when adaptive management is done well and the team receives adequate support and time to implement good adaptive management, does it actually contribute to success. So those were the major findings. What we concluded is that this evidence-based learning approach is really useful and practical for this particular evaluation, as well as the next one I'll be talking about in a second. Over the last 3 years, the CS effectiveness team has set out to improve the evidence base for and conclusions about the effectiveness of applying the CS. It's been a really difficult question to answer, really, and it changes depending on the context and the circumstances, but we've compiled as much evidence as we could find, and we've done a number of sort of surveys of membership to consolidate more information. In conclusion, we've shown that there is strong evidence that when a structured adaptive management approach is done well and teams have the support and agency, then goals and objectives are more likely to be achieved. I'm going to jump straight into the next initiative, and I'm going to talk about this one in a rapid hurry, just for the sake of time. We also did a presentation on this during our CMP retreat last year. So this has been presented before, and the link to the report is also available in the slide deck. So what we did, and again, Sheila O'Connor, as well as Steph and Mike, were also involved in this evaluation. So it was the same team of people. What we aimed to do was assess the effectiveness of CMP's Collaborative Learning Initiative. This was a 5-year initiative funded by the Moore Foundation. for the most part, as well as the Walton Foundation. So in this evaluation, we also used an evidence-based learning approach. We aimed to this initiative itself, so this 5-year consolidation of all these initiatives aimed to harness the collective knowledge of CMP as a partnership and to promote cross-organizational learning between all of our organizations to inform and improve our conservation efforts. And what we aim to do is to assess whether CMP achieved its goal in this CLI. So we found that the CLI was effective in fostering collaborative learning opportunities across organizations. It's supported with building a sense of community and generating valuable products. But the challenge and the difficulty was around actually taking those products and implementing and transforming that information into action. So there was mixed evidence that cross-organizational learning actually led to improved conservation practice. So that's going to be a major focus for the next couple of years with regards to collaborative learning within CMP. And that report is accessible in the slide deck, so you can link directly to that particular report if you'd like to learn more. And there's a slide for any questions or comments or requests for resources if you need them. I'm so sorry. I'm also presenting the next one, but then I promise you won't hear much more from me today. So I'm also introducing you guys to the IUCN CMP Threats and Actions Classification Initiative. Nick often refers to this as the most boring, geeky, and yet essential initiative to understand and share conservation data. This initiative has also been running for some time. Some of you might already know the history of these classification systems. There were early efforts by both CMP and IUCN individually, but they came together in 2008 to develop a unified classification for both our actions, conservation actions and conservation threats. This was published in 2008 and was considered version 1. However, after that, based on new information that was coming in and changes within the system, we felt that it was important to update and improve these classification systems. CMP developed version 2, and although IUCN supported a lot of the work that CMP was doing, because of a number of internal reasons, they weren't able to adopt this version, which led to a bit of a divergence between IUCN's version and CMP's version. So over time, IUCN made some minor changes to their version, which culminated in the current version, which is now version 3.3. So in 2022, 2023, we really worked to unify these threats and actions classification systems again. So we're hoping to publish our version 4 of the threats this year and hopefully finalize the actions over the next year or two. So over the last couple of years, we've consolidated a joint committee, which has been established to do this revision. We have reviewed existing uses and previous versions of these classifications and what has been developed by others. This is a big shout out to our Canadian colleagues with the Department of Environment and Climate Change in Canada. And they have done a lot of thinking about this already, and a lot of work that they've already done was incorporated into this updated threats classification. We solicited and received over 170 distinct comments and suggestions from IUCN, as well as additional comments that came in from CMP members. And draft versions have been shared with practitioners around the world for detailed feedback. We are currently working on finalizing those versions and hopefully, as I mentioned, publishing the threats classification quite soon. This initiative links to the Advance and Share Guidance and Tools strategy within CMP's strategic plan. And we know, based on our Google Analytics data, that the threats and actions classifications are the most commonly downloaded CMP resource. So we know it's important. I'm not going to talk through all the major changes in this version of the threats and actions classification. I'm just going to show you some of the major ones. So this basically lists level 0, which is a brand new level we've incorporated up here. So we've got this level of use of lands, use and management of ecosystems and species, and then additional sources of stress. There may be some changes to this over the next couple weeks as we consolidate some of the feedback that we've received from IUCN. There were not many major changes to the level 1 threats, but we did make some minor changes to the wording and some additions to those level 1 names. We also added a couple of level 2. So you'll notice fencing and walls is a brand new addition to this classification, which wasn't in the previous versions. We've also made some major modifications to number 7, and we've used Aristotle's 4 elements, so fire, water, earth, and air, to depict some of the changes within natural system management and modifications. You'll notice there's also some key changes to the pollution. Previously, pollution was listed out by its source. In this case, we've rather classified it together in terms of whether it's solid waste, whether it's in water. So it's more about where that pollution sits within the environment at the time in which you're doing that assessment. So those were some of the major changes that I just wanted to introduce you to, but I'd really encourage you to take a look. So there are links here in the slide deck to the updated draft version, which is due to be finalized quite soon. There's also a draft manuscript, which is available for you to have a look at and potentially comment on. If you'd like to get in touch with myself or Nick, we'd be happy to include you within our working group if you'd like to be more actively involved within the actions classification update, which is reconvening in the next couple months. So these, as I mentioned, are currently draft, so you still have a little bit of time to comment, not much with regards to the threats, because we really need to finalize it quite soon. But if you'd like to be involved with our actions update, please give us a shout. All right, that's it from me, I promise. There's a slide there for any questions you might have, and I'm going to hand back over to Wes.
Thanks, Claire. Great presentations. So next up, we have policy impact, and it's going to be Nico and Lisa presenting.
Yeah, thanks, Wessel. I think some of you have seen the launch roughly a year ago of the Policy Impact Learning Initiative. We're happy to share back what happened in year 1. It was an exciting journey. The initiative is about basically learning what are the factors that actually influence the selection and also the success of engagement strategies with policy. And first of all, I'd like to thank the core team that grew substantially from the outset of the initiative. It includes many people, but I want to quickly say them. Will Morgan from Conservation Evidence, then 2 people from Pew. I don't know if you guys are here, but John Fisher and also Michelle Kempa. We had Will Beal and John Morrison from WWF, and Aparna Sridhar, and also Kirsten Clay from TNC, and then Stefan Ferger from Euronature. At the beginning, also Nathalie Dubois from formerly EI. I think she has changed organization. So thanks so much for all the effort you've put into this. It was really a joint thinking journey. And it was only possible because we were moving so fantastically together. Next slide, please. Just to link to the strategic plan quickly. We talked about that last time, but all of this that we're doing has to do obviously with cross-project learning. We're trying to help to, enhance the key database, particular CAMEL, through standard theories of change for key actions, and then also hopefully encouraging learning based on the evidence that we assess. So yeah, I think the link is pretty clear. Next slide, please. The first thing that we needed to figure out is what do we mean with policy impact? What do we mean with policy? And what do we mean with impact? And this picture, this theory of change that you see here kind of became one key thing for our debate in the beginning, because obviously policy impact can mean the left-hand side of this theory of change, the impact of policy engagement strategies on the level of ambition or the quality of the policies that these engagement strategies are trying to influence. But also, obviously, the right-hand side really matters, which is has to do with the impact of the policies on the real world and on what we actually want to have an impact on, which is biodiversity and human well-being. Behavior change as well, so decrease of threats. So we tried to tackle that in the beginning, and I cannot go into the details in the few minutes we have here. We're hoping to have a webinar somewhere later in the year. But we thought quite a bit about linking different indicator sets to at least get a feeling for what do the policies actually have to do with indicators in the real world. And also we explored what we call policy life cycle analysis to understand better how over time and based on which criteria policies are changing in their quality and in their ambition level based on actions of civil society that trying to influence that. So there was lots of thinking we did in the first half of the year on that. And then together with the core team in several rounds of consultation and joint thinking, reflection, we developed a theory of change for like mapping all the different actions that relate to engaging with policy. And Lisa is going to take you through that, I think.
Yeah, I'm afraid, thanks Nico, and hi all. I'm afraid I won't have time to actually take you through the theory of change, but I can quickly tell you what it shows. So what our theory of change does is that it illustrates the policy process, and like Nico said, also its impact, and the related civil society engagement strategies that can be employed at different stages of this process. What it also does is it depicts the influence of some additional factors on the policy process, but also on your choice of strategy, such as enabling conditions and policy windows. Yeah, like I said, we don't have time to show you the full theory of change now, but if you are interested to have a look, the link to the Mirati Share project is included in this slide. So along the theory of change, together with the core team, we identified key areas of interest, and we drafted learning questions and assumptions, which then formed the basis for our collection of evidence, which took up some of the last months of last year. So we looked for two complementary sources of evidence from practice and published evidence. Evidence from practice, we collected that through 19 semi-structured interviews with practitioners from different types of organizations and institutions, universities, civil society organizations, knowledge brokering organizations, etc. But we also wanted our interviewees to represent different roles in policy engagement. So we talked to lobbyists, policy officers, researchers, legislative advisors, and many more different roles. And these interviews, once they were completed, they were transcribed and are now ready to be analyzed. At the same time, Will Morgan from Conservation Evidence collected published evidence. He focused on studies highlighted by our core team members, but also key references within those studies and web searches using keywords. And he labeled those collected sources, and he extracted the highlights. So what this shows is that we have a substantial evidence base that we believe contains a lot of very relevant insights and learnings regarding civil society engagement in the environmental policies. We are very keen to start analyzing the evidence, compile the insights and findings, of course, and then share it with you and the wider community. Next slide, please. And as I said, we have not analyzed our evidence yet. But we did compile some initial findings and some highlights that we gathered during our evidence collection phase. And we compiled that in a slide deck. And again, you can find the link to that in that slide. Yeah, we're almost at the end. Nico will now take you through our plans for the coming year.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I think you've said a lot of it already. We're sitting on a treasure of collected evidence now with which we're hoping to answer or at least explore many of the questions that we've put together with the core team. And obviously the next step is to really look at that, to assess it all, and then to compile and conclude what we're actually learning. We're hoping that we can, on the one hand, make a new entry on the conservationlearning.org website. Also, obviously, populate Meradi Share Camel with a theory of change once it's agreed by a wider group. And then what we would really like to do is we've seen inspiring toolkits also today, put together what we call a policy engagement toolkit that's really tailored for practitioners, to help in the startup phase before engaging with policy, but also to help with some key analysis tools and so on and so forth. And obviously sharing. So eventually we want to do a webinar on the initial findings, but obviously ideally also then on the analyzed data that we have and what we learn. We're still keen to get input from everybody, obviously. So if you want, please reach out with any questions you may have. And also, obviously, we're keen to fund the next phase. So in case you have any ideas for organizations or partners that would be interested in supporting especially the assessment of the evidence that we're now sitting on, that would be fantastic if you reach out to us as well. So these are all the next steps. Many of them are already planned or starting. So that's where we are. And if you have any questions, next slide, we'd be grateful, obviously, if you could put them on that slide deck or reach out to us directly.
Thanks, Nico, and thank you, Lisa. So we've got three new initiatives to discuss today, and we're starting with leveraging AI for conservation. And that is going to be Annette, Carrie, and Barsha presenting to us today.
It looks like Caroline has her hand up too. I'm not sure if we have time.
Carolyn, yes, you do.
Yeah, sorry, just not to ask a specific question, but maybe just to, we've been putting the links to areas for you to add questions or comments. I'm assuming that the speakers are kind of taking up the full amount of time, but if the speakers could make sure that they go in and answer those questions so that those on the call get their questions answered. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that announcement. Yeah, good point. The places to add your questions are linked in the chat. So please do go in and add your questions there to the presentations themselves. So thank you. So moving right along to leveraging AI for conservation standards.
Yeah, thanks, Wessel, and hi everyone. It's Annette here from Bush Heritage in Australia. As Wessel mentioned, the previous initiatives have all done a lot of great work over the years. We're a new initiative just starting out, and we came about based on some conversations that were at the last CMP retreat in October. So wanting to outline what we're doing and ask for some help from the community to make all this happen. I'll start with presenting the initial slides, and then Carrie will take over, and then Varsha will finish up with some demonstrations. You've probably heard a lot about AI already. There's all sorts of things going on. We're wanting to focus in on just how can we use AI for improving conservation practice, basically improving the use of the standards. And we're tackling this along with, we've had some initial conversations with the CCNet board about tackling it as a joint initiative so we can best cover the whole community. Early days yet, but we're making progress. So this is our core team. as I mentioned myself, Kari and Varsha. And there's opportunities for you to get involved, which we'll talk about shortly. We're also getting some great pro bono support from Brian Knowles and his team at ESA Sitka on the sort of technical aspects of all of this. In terms of where we fit in the plan, it's primarily around this use of guidance and tools. That's where the focus of our work is, but it's really going to have some influence, I think, on all strategies. We can see a whole bunch of things coming along. For example, strategic partnerships, perhaps with other holders of various information sources and the like. So we're focusing on the guidance and tools aspects, but we're thinking we're going to be playing in other areas as well. So what is this opportunity? Well, AI can do a whole lot of things. We're focusing in on two aspects in particular around search and translations. So the view we have is that as a community, we've got an enormous body of knowledge out there in all sorts of formats and locations, in various document libraries, videos, meeting notes, case studies, all sorts of things. It's a fantastic resource, but unless you know where to look and you search very carefully, it's kind of hard to find. So we think there's a role for AI here that in the way it can troll things and provide back answers based on multiple sources. We think that's potentially a huge benefit to us. And related to that is we cover the world, of course, so we cover a whole lot of languages. And today, people are limited to finding resources in their own particular language unless they can speak multiple languages or they're big on translating sources and the like, but it's just not easy. So the translation abilities through AI are improving all the time. A little bit of way to go, but they're pretty good now, pretty functional. So we want to leverage those two capabilities. There's already some out there. The models that are already out there, they've been trained on what's available publicly on the web. So if you choose to play with something like ChatGPT, it knows about the conservation standards, it knows about all the resources on the CMP websites and the like. And so you can ask questions of it and its answers aren't too bad, quite really. But we're wanting to improve on that, which is what a lot of people are doing now with AI, is training the generic models to specific sets of knowledge. So we want to pick up some models and train them on the conservation standards in some depth, so that it really understands definitions and the context and interrelationships between factors, so that it would know what a KEA is and that it's comprised of multiple indicators and all those kind of data relationships that are embedded in the standards. So that's what we're trying to do. On the right-hand side there is what we're hoping the initial service that we deliver will provide, in that people anywhere around the world can put in a query in their own language. The AI system will troll the world for related information and play back an answer again in their own language. So it can tap into resources in any language, and you're not limited to anything that's available in your own language. So, and it's doing that from the resources that we feed the model. So a trusted set of resources that we collectively decide are trusted resources. And so the model's getting trained on good information, and therefore we're hoping it can provide good information back. So all this is kind of happening around us. As a wise soul at the CCNet meeting said, all of this can happen to us or with us. It's going to happen regardless. We want to start directing it to ways that we can make best advantage for ourselves. Next slide, thanks. I'll hand over here to Kari, who'll talk a bit about how we might build this and how we might deliver it to people.
Yeah, thanks, Annette. Hello, everyone. So just want to show you briefly here what this might look like. This is not a real tool, and just note that this is just an example of how you might access the tool that Annette was describing. So for example, maybe when you come to the conservation standards trio of sites, maybe there's a little question mark in the bottom next to the translate tool where you can open up an AI that would allow you to ask questions as Annette described. with a respected and knowledgeable set of resources under as a database. So just an example of hopefully we could build something like this into the website so it's really easy to access and clearly linked to the conservation standards. So the proposed timeline and expected products. We're over the past few months since the CMP retreat late last year, we've been busy. The core team that you just saw has been busy trying to get some things in place. We are following up with this. We'll be following up this presentation. We'll be emailing CMP and CCNet members to gauge interest and get suggestions for data sources, resources, libraries, et cetera. And then based on the folks we've been talking with, for example, Brian Knowles, as Annette mentioned at ESA, the developers of Marathi, there's an expectation that there will be some off-the-shelf products available fairly soon that could really work well for us that we just need to subscribe to and customize. So we're kind of waiting for that to come out. And then once we have a preliminary tool in place, then we would absolutely need folks to help test and train the model. So we are looking for people who'd be interested in helping out with that. So some of the ways that you could help are helping to identify and curate priority data sources, helping us make sure that we have appropriate permissions to use those data sources, cleaning and preparing data, testing and training the model, and also we'll need to have a good governance structure, both to keep the funding going long-term, but also to make sure that we are using this and maintaining this responsibly over time. So a bunch of ways to get involved as we get this initiative up and running. Some examples of the type of data that we would hopefully access through this AI. Of course, the data that's available on the websites, including case studies and things, the resource libraries, both conservation standards and the CCNet coaches library. We would like to mine the CCNet listserv archive since there's 10 plus years of excellent information in that archive of emails. Perhaps Marathi public data. You'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment from Varsha, and then also evidence libraries and other data sources. We're going to be looking for recommendations of other data sources we could use. So I just want to show you, we're going to have a couple polls here coming up next to wake you up and get you interacting again. But just want to show you what this might look like. The question we're going to be asking you is, what type of question might you want to ask this type of AI? And what you're looking at here on the screen is just a conservation planner that Brian Knowles from ESA created based on tools that are already available out there through ChatGPT. So for example, when you click on that example link that I had on the website earlier, you might get a tool that looks like this, and I'll go live to show you what it looks like. So this is the example conservation planner tool. Note that this is just a mock-up. This is not what the tool would eventually look like, and it would be more sophisticated than this, but we just want to show you how it might work. So for example, there's prompting questions here that we can include in the tool, or you might type in a question yourself that's like, what is a good indicator for a vegetation recovery strategy? You hit the button and it will think for a little bit, and then hopefully I have enough bandwidth for it to start kicking out the answer. If it doesn't, we might not be able to do this live demo, but it seems to be quite slow. Usually it spits out the answer fairly quickly, but it is apparently not working for me right now. So that was going to be our live demo. Let me show you another type of example question that you could ask just to, again, generate some excitement here. So you might have more of a process-based question. What are the key elements of a theory of change? Of a conservation theory of change, sorry. And then you can ask it to please respond in Spanish. And I can guarantee this works, although it's probably not going to work now since apparently my bandwidth is challenged. And yeah, it's not. Oh, there we go. So this conservation planner mockup that Brian created for us uses the conservation standards as the resource. So it's pulling directly from that source, but you can also set it so it would mine the entire whatever is available on the web, etc. So pretty cool tool. Just an example of the types of questions you could ask. So I'm going to go back to our slideshow, and we're going to have a poll question here. What types of questions would you want to ask a well-trained conservation standards AI? So I think, there we go, it launches, and did someone already drop this in the chat here?
Varsha did.
Yes.
There you go.
it's in the chat.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's in the chat.
Yeah, so once you type your questions, we should start seeing some examples of questions that people might want to ask. And it's anonymous, we won't see your name, so. Great, good example. Awesome. Yeah, so this is great. You can see hopefully the questions popping up on the screen here. And just so you know, we are going to follow up at the end of this, well, after this meeting, with a survey where we will be asking everyone to respond with the types of questions you might want to ask, because that will help us as the initiative work group think through how to actually build the AI and what resources we might need to make available. This is awesome. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Good set of questions. I think this is super helpful. So topical as well as process questions coming in, which is great. So again, know that you're going to be able to keep responding, because I'm going to go to the second question here. So as we all know, naming something is a really powerful tool. So we would like to hear from you. What do you think what should we call this AI? What would you name it if you were able to name the AI? And yeah, there you go. CS assistant. Planner's bot. Awesome. Okay. Common theme, conservation, coach, bot. That's great. Awesome. Okay, I think I'm going to move on. This is great to see. I'm going to move on to, I think, Varsha's. How do I get out of this? We're stuck in a word cloud.
It could go to the
You're
next
gonna-
slide, I think. If you just
It's not letting me go to next slide.
You can't, you have
Can
to
you
exit
escape?
out.
Ah, there
Yeah.
we go.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. There we go. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk to you about a small project that is not very different from what Carrie and Annette presented, and it's just another way to view the same thing. So we know Miradi has about 500 public projects, and there's a lot of evidence sitting in these projects. And so we were thinking that it would be such a useful tool if we could easily access, if we could build an AI chatbot like what Carrie showed you, that actually draws on the evidence seated within these projects, so that conservation practitioners can understand, from past projects, what have been successes, what have been failures. And this is something that we at FOS, as well as we at CMP, have tried in many different ways. Like Camel is one such effort. But one of the challenges with that has been it's slow, it's manual, right? And it can be inefficient because things change and we have to keep updating them. So kind of relying on this really cutting edge technology to help us think through what some of those examples might be, what some of those lessons are, could really help us access current and useful evidence to incorporate into our work. And currently we are in the trial phase. As Carrie mentioned, talking to Brian and just like keeping up with this topic, it seems like we are a second away from getting a product that will give us all of the kind of tools we need to be able to build something like this. So we are in the process of exploring what models and what tools are out there, as well as trying to spend some time to understand what data usage policies and governance mechanisms we need to set because we know that there's always a certain level of risk that comes with AI, and we want to make sure that we understand that, so that we're providing a knowledgeable and an ethical bot for you all. And so if you tap next, so that's something like what we're envisioning it would look like. And so if you go in there and click the ask me a question, you can ask things like, what are typically the threats for a target XY, right? And it's going to go in and look at all of these projects and give you some answers. And then if you keep tapping a few more times, Carrie, there are some other examples, like what is a good strategy to deal with a certain threat? Or what could be a good indicator? How does the strategy typically work? So these are some things that you can, these are some of the types of questions that you might be able to ask the bot. And so, like I mentioned, we're just in the phase where we're trying to figure out what might be the best tools to use. So if you are also interested in this space and would like to join in by either contributing some information about a bot we can use, or if you'd like to join in the effort to train the bot once we start building it, please reach out to us. This is just a little bit about what we're thinking about by using an evidence base like Mirati for this work. If I sit back to you, Annette, to talk through the next step.
Sure. So this is our last slide about what's coming up next. We're going to send an email in the next few days once we've got a link to this recording out to the CMP CNet membership, asking for help. So the sorts of things in that blue box to the right. So people that might want to help us test and train the models, what sort of knowledge bases we should tap into. You know, we already know of quite a few, but there's more out there, no doubt. And also a bit more of a landscape scan about who else is working in this space, and who should we be talking to. We don't want to tackle this alone. We want to work with others where we can. So we're looking for help for those sorts of things in the blue box. While the core team, we need to obviously keep going with the background work, and happy for people to help us on this as well. But around just keeping on top of this technology, as Varsha said, it's just changing all the time. We don't yet really know what this is going to cost to build and maintain. So we need to start quantifying that, and then looking for funding sort of initially and ongoing as needed. And also all the governance, privacy kind of considerations that Kerry mentioned, we've got to really get on top of that. So that's the focus of our next phase. Look out for an email and respond to that, or get in touch directly with us if you're interested in this space. And hopefully we'll come back to another member meeting soon with a bit more things to show and play with. So I'll hand back to Nick. Thanks for that.
Thanks, y'all. That was really informative and really cool. Looks like next we have linking conservation standards to the global 30 by 30 conversation with Nick.
Yeah, thanks, all. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. And so this is some work that's towards a global approach for assessing the effectiveness of protected additional conservation areas. It's an effort to really bring elements of the conservation standards into the global conversation about the CBD Target 3, which is shorthanded as 30 by 30. You can see there's not a CMP logo yet on this screen, because this is actually work being done by the IUCN WCPA World Commission on Protected Areas Conservation Effectiveness Task Force. And we're also working with the WCMC Protected Planet Initiative. And so you can see the folks involved here. It could become a CMP initiative. And I guess that's the question of whether there's enough overlap and interest to make this part of CMP. And we hope to convince you that it might be. There is a relationship to the CMP strategic plan here. So this is particularly, it fits a lot of the bits of the plan, but in particular here, this is the theory of change for developing strategic partnerships. And in particular, I think this is an opportunity to bring the conservation standards to the global protected area work. You know, there's hundreds of thousands of protected areas around the world and protected area systems in every country. And they really could benefit from the standards and vice versa. And so I think there's a real opportunity here to link out and reach to a community that is closely allied to what we do, but has traditionally been somewhat different. You all are probably familiar with 30 by 30. This is Target 3 from the CBD that was endorsed in 2022. And it's about 30% of the world's land and waters in are effectively conserved and managed. So it's not just quantity, but it's also quantity. But the question is, how do we actually assess effectiveness at the global level? So how do we actually look at that quantity and quality? And this is both protected areas as well as what used to be called OECMs, although we're proposing to call them additional conservation areas, or ACAs, and together those are PACAs, P-A-C-A. So our task force has a theory of change, which I'm sure you all can appreciate. And it starts by, there's a ton of different frameworks that have been published over the decades to look at the effectiveness of protected areas. So things like the Met or the Green List, there's many others, countries have their own. So we started by taking all those different frameworks that are out there and putting them next to each other in a Rosetta Stone and trying to come up with the common principles for how we might think about effectiveness. So we're using that to then develop a unified framework approach, and we're pilot testing that with key protected area and additional conservation area systems and thinking about high-level criteria and indicators. The idea is then not to replace necessarily the Green List or those other tools, but to help improve those frameworks and tools. So we're sharing our findings with those managers and working with them as they update their standards. And then this can also be done into Protected Planet, which is run by WCMC. It is the global scorekeeper right now for how countries are doing on their 30 by 30 commitments. So we're kind of baking that into then the scorekeeping that's being done in that tool. And of course, if all protected conserved areas have public, credible, current, and useful outcome-based effect assessments, then managers can use them to identify their places where they need to improve, and they can get the needed technical capacity and support. So that will lead to more effective protected areas and systems. But it's also that 30-30 by commitments can be easily tracked, and then broader society has confidence in protected and conserved areas and provides sufficient support. So it's really for improving. It's evaluation or assessments for improving the work we do. And that seems to us to track very nicely to what the conservation standards are trying to do and what this community is trying to do. So here's the Rosetta Stone that we did, and you can see we lined up all these different components. So we looked at the Met, the Green, the Standard, the SAGE. There's about 25 others. It's not shown here, but we did include explicitly the conservation standards in this analysis. And as you'll see, a lot of the gaps or the things that the standards bring are really coming to our generic framework based on that analysis. Our framework requires then, we think we could only assess effectiveness along a theory of change. So it's a set of hurdles that you have to go over. Governance and planning leads to strategies being implemented, leads to threat reduction, leads to the values being conserved. And so we have a generic framework, a generic theory of change for an effective, protected, and conserved area. So we have to have good governance and sound design. We have to have the enabling conditions in place. We have to have adaptive strategy implementation. So you have to plan your strategies and actually implement them in an adaptive fashion. As a result, we get to threats reduced. As a result, we get to our area values being conserved. We get to human well-being enhanced. And there's a back loop of monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So we think that if we want to look at effectiveness, we need to be tracking both the management processes. How are we doing on the left side of this theory of change? As well as the outcomes. How are we doing on the right side of this chain? So this is the theory of change that we're proposing to use as the global way of assessing effectiveness. For those of you, most of you on this call, who have a conservation standards background, we're trying to develop indicators for each of the results, but these shapes look pretty familiar, right? I mean, it's really baking in this concept of how the conservation standards think about threats, to think about strategies, to think about adaptation, to think about monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and as well as the outcomes. You'll see, and I'll come more to this in a second, we are not using the word target, we're using the word values instead of target for reasons I'll talk about in a little bit. But it's really kind of taking the conservation standards and the whole way of thinking and merging it into how we think about effectiveness of protected areas. So then what we're doing is we're thinking about ways of measuring each of those results that you saw in that theory of change. And so, for example, especially when we talk about threats or when we talk about assessing the outcomes, we're drawing on the conservation standards. And so one option, for example, would be to think about measuring those threats at protected area in terms of either SMART objectives, and then people could track their progress along those objectives and then translate that to whether the result has been achieved, or also thinking about the threat assessments per the conservation standards and using that as a way of tracking baseline status and current status as well. So again, we're taking a lot of the approaches, tools, principles from the conservation standards and trying to think about it and bring it to this conversation about how we think about effectiveness. So we are currently testing this framework with a whole bunch of different practitioners. There's been folks in Latin America working on this for 10 years or more, but a whole bunch of Latin American protected systems in Chile and Peru and Uruguay and places like that through something called Red Parcas. We've been working very closely with Parks Canada, the Canadian Wildlife Service, and trying to apply this framework to the context of the parks that protected areas that they're managing, as well with task force members. And what you can see over here on the right is some work in Uruguay where a bunch of Latin American protected area managers are all kind of voting on with cards of whether a given set of results that we're tracking makes sense in their particular context. What do we need from CMP? Well, we would love getting help in finding additional protected area systems that would like to help test this work, particularly systems in different levels of skills and capacity. Also thinking about OECMs or additional conservation areas, also thinking about terrestrial, thinking about marine, thinking about community managed reserves. Having different types of systems to help test this framework would be really, really valuable. And then as we take this forward, we would also need help from CMP orgs and CCNet coaches to provide training support as PA systems roll this work out. So we're hoping to get it adopted globally, but then there's going to be a ton of work to get people up to speed to be able to do these things, to do the threats analysis, to do the viability analysis, things like that. So we're looking forward to engaging with CMP on that. And I guess that does raise the question of whether this should also become a CMP initiative. If you want to get involved, contact me or contact my colleague Paola, and we can certainly try to get you involved in this work. The last thing I will add is that there's a related effort that our task force did that I think has some bearing with the conservation standards. There's a lot of confusion, as usual, about words and what we call things. Even what do we call a protected area? What do we call a additional conservation area, an OECM? And so Madhu Rao, who is the chair of WCPA, charged our task force with coming up with what we call a standard lexicon of terms for area-based conservation. So we spent a lot of time reviewing different words, different terms for a whole bunch of different things, including what we call protected areas, what we call systems of protected areas, how do we think about effectiveness, how we think about equity. I'm skipping over most of that, but there is a section of our lexicon that is also of terms used in action planning and adaptive management of these protected and conserved areas. So we're defining for each of these terms, the term that we want to propose, possible synonyms, a definition, and then an exposition. So this is all in the published paper that's about to come out in Conservation Biology. So you can see we're talking about conservation action planning, adaptive management. We're also talking about things like values, direct threats, and pressures. So values, as I'll come more to a second, are the one tricky thing, but we're actually pulling the CMP definition for things like action, theory of change, outcome, result, vision. And all these are based on the CMP definitions that are in the conservation standards. So for example, goals being attached to the bigger things, objectives being to the more intermediate things and that they're smart. So I think this is a real opportunity to enshrine in global legislation and how the world talks about these things, a lot of the CMP terms. And as you know, to be very Orwellian about it, if you can control the terms that people use, you can control a lot of the thinking and the things that they do. So I think it's a really important opportunity. As you'll see, the whole target value is the one confusing thing. And so there is a little underlined here. Terms are needed to describe a fact in a system one cares about, and the qualitative amount is something that needs to be achieved as part of a SMART goal or objective. Unfortunately, CMP uses targets to refer to the former and desired future values to refer to the latter. And the Convention on Biological Diversity uses values to refer to the former and targets to refer to the latter. We're saying in an area-based conservation context, the CBD terminology is preferred. So we want to use target for the amount of things in a goal or objective. We want to use the word value to represent the green circles at the end of a theory of change. And I guess I would like to raise that question to CMP and see if CMP can concur with the rest of the world. I don't think we're going to change CBD, but maybe we could get to unity there over time. So that's something for as we think about maybe as a feed into the next presentation, as we think about the next version of the conservation standards, one thing to take up. So that's a ton in a hurry. Would love input and feedback. Again, I hope you see the value of linking these two worlds, and happy to take questions or get participation.
Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I do want to acknowledge that we are quite a bit over. Thank you if you've stayed on, but also if you need to jump off, please do, and just know that we have, we'll be recording, or we are recording this, so we'll make sure you get access to it later. And I'm going to try to make up a little bit of time and go fairly quickly through this, but this is just kind of the introduction to the topic, and you'll hear more from me about this in the coming month or so. So it is time to start thinking about CS 5.0. And so just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what we have in mind. maybe a little refresher about where we've been. So we're on version 4 of the conservation standards. We've evolved these over time, kind of practicing our own type of adaptive management, learning what works, where we need to improve. And I'd say also as we've moved along, we've had greater participation from the broader community in developing them, and especially in this last version, there's quite a bit of involvement, and we want to keep that going for 5.0. So we're aiming for 2024, 2025 to do an update. Maybe just to make sure we're all on the same page about when we say what an update of the conservation standards is. Maybe also agree on what the conservation standards are. And so I think we've got the core document. That's the document of the practices and principles, those high level practices and principles. It is not, or shouldn't be, really the detailed how-to guidance. It includes, but there's a lot of other materials that help support it. So we've heard today about the threats and actions classification. There's also a whole bunch of how-to guides and case studies. And we've heard about Meraki, we've heard about AI. A lot of us have used Miro and other solutions to help implement the conservation standards. When we talk right now, or when I'm talking about updating, it's really focusing on this core document, but I hope that we will also in the process think about what we need to do in these other areas to make sure we're kind of keeping up with and supporting those basic practices and principles. Oh, and just to mention, the conservation standards we aim to have them in a variety of languages, and right now we even have them in 9, which is super exciting. If you've been monitoring your email, a couple just came out in the last week. So a refresher on what we did for version 4.0. In 2018, we did a broader survey of the community to identify key themes, areas where they thought that there was more work to be done on the standards. We formed working groups. It included CMP and CCNet folks, and those working groups drafted the text for the themes, came up with an initial rough draft. We went through several rounds of revisions within the working groups, but also bringing in CMP, got the final technical content toward the end of 2019, and then put a fair amount of effort into improving the look and feel of the conservation standard. So updating our cycle, our logos, getting some professional help in pulling it all together. Since then, as I mentioned earlier, we've had 9 translations of the conservation standards, which is pretty cool. We have 2 more that are in process, and we've done some work as a community to update some of those other tools and frameworks and guidance and such that are associated with the conservation standards. The proposed process for 5.0, it's fairly similar to what we did for 4.0. We had a session at the CMP retreat in October 2023, where we identified some initial key themes. I'll share those with you in a moment. And we talked about the overall process. Between now and mid to end of year, we hope to get some broader input on those key themes. And in fact, I'm going to do a little survey right now. And we'll be forming working groups and drafting that initial text, getting input on those initial drafts and doing revisions so that hopefully sometime in the beginning of 2025, we can be working on the final production. And then beyond that, the translations and updating other associated guidance. There are a few assumptions with this timeline. And the first one is that we don't think that there's a major overhaul that's needed. There's definitely some areas where there will probably be some significant content updates, but we did a fairly major overhaul in 4.0 and have had really positive feedback on that. So we're hoping that this is more of a minor overhaul with maybe diving deep in a few different areas. we are also hoping that we don't need to change the look and feel, that we're pretty happy with that, and we can just adapt the Word template. And then also, I think it's really important to have 1 or 2 people coordinating the overall process and bringing this all together, as we've done in other versions. So there is a slide that's hidden here, and I'm only going to go through this really quickly, but we're proposing a structure where we have working groups who will have a lead, and they'll be developing the content, suggesting actual text, being very specific, maybe even ideally identifying areas where there's supporting materials that could be developed or could be improved, updated. And there'll be regular communication with the coordinator who's going to be responsible for setting up meetings, keeping everyone on track, bringing together the edits, sending it back out for review. So just kind of nudging the whole process along. And then the CMP members, we expect and hope that you all will be doing any edits to the core document and providing any final say on the content. I do want to be really clear that the conservation standards have been a CMP product. The CMP has been the steward of it, but I really hope that these working groups are much broader than CMP as they were with 4.0. So I think this is really much more of a community effort. Just to let you know what we heard at the CMP retreat in terms of some kind of general themes, evidence, climate. There were a bunch of minor updates that were identified, some suggestions around steps 4, 5, and also 3, some suggestions around including more on diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and human well-being aspects, talking about other approaches to doing conservation management and spatial and technical solutions, and also talking about scale. So a lot of different topics. And in a moment, I'm going to, I guess that's right now. We do have a poll question. If somebody wouldn't mind dropping the poll link again into the chat box. I'd love to hear from you just as an initial start, see who's out there and who might want to be involved, and which themes you would contribute to if you were involved. And I think we have a lot of themes that we could potentially work on, but I don't want to, if there's a key missing theme that you didn't see in, you don't see in the survey, I'd love to hear that too. So is that poll launched?
Yeah, let me launch that.
Clear. And maybe while Jacqueline's doing that, just yes, I see, oh, you've already added some questions, comments. There's probably some more here. Feel free to reach out to me directly also. If you don't hear from me, or if you want to connect me up with anybody. So